So hello and welcome back to the 2022 Food Service Summit. I'm Tiffany Leon and I'm the Assistant Director of Training and Professional Programs at FAIR. So now without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce this session's presenters, Alisha Ohl, David Schelly, and Megan Riedl, and I will let them take it from here.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for attending our talk. Today we will be presenting some of the findings from our study that examine the experiences of college students living with food allergies. We will also present the implications of our findings for families, individuals living with food allergies, people working in the food service industries, and for those of us in the higher education industry as well. So I'm Alisha Ohl, hi. I'm the program director and chair of the Clarkson University Occupational Therapy Program, and I'm also the mother of a 9-year-old daughter with food allergies. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm David Schelly. I am a sociologist by training, but I'm in the same department as Alisha, so I'm in occupational therapy now. Got my Ph.D. from University of Wisconsin, trained in grounded theory and ethnomethodology, and I teach statistics here, oddly enough.
And Megan?
Hi, my name is Megan Riedl, and I'm the Director of Student Accessibility Services at SUNY Canton. And I've been in disability services for about 15 years now.
Okay, so here's the outline for our, yes, I am on, okay. Here's the outline for our talk. Toward the end, I just want to point out that we're going to have a Q&A with Megan, our expert on student accessibility services, and then we'll leave it open for audience questions. So to set the context for today's talk, I want to just point out that I said that we're focusing on college students with food allergies. We're particularly interested in college students with food allergies during their first year of college. This is a unique time and a unique group of individuals because for the first time in their lives, they're often, it's often the first time they're leaving the nest. And this really marks a shift away from their families being the primary people responsible for managing the day-to-day food allergy needs that they have to their own self-management of the food allergy needs. College freshmen are responsible for learning to manage their own schedules, social lives, their diet, their exercise, and their overall health, all the while juggling the academic demands of higher education. So what do we know about college students with food allergies? Well, we don't know a whole lot. The research is rather limited and it's largely survey-based and quantitative. So what we do know is that young adults with food allergy that are college aged oftentimes don't carry self-injectable epinephrine. So the carry rates range from as low as 4.7% to 61% across studies. And we do know that the lack of available epinephrine is a significant risk factor for food allergy fatality. Okay. We also know that college-age individuals with food allergy oftentimes may have faulty beliefs about their food allergy, and they may engage in risky behavior. So in the Green, Hott, and colleagues study in 2009, it's a survey study, they found that 18.5% of their participants thought that a food was safe because it didn't contain enough allergen to cause a reaction. And 14.5% thought they could eat around an allergen. So imagine having ice cream and with almonds and eating around the almonds and thinking that it's safe. In terms of risky behavior, we know that they don't carry SIE in high rates, but another issue or indicator of risky behavior is that while these individuals are good about telling their friends that they have a food allergy, only 38% of the sample in the Sampson et al. Study actually told their friends what to do if they went into anaphylaxis. And another risky behavior that was highlighted, this was a little surprising, was that a little over half of the participants in the Sampson study said that they had actually tested themselves to see if they were still food allergic. So we have college age students who are essentially doing a food challenge on their own to see if they still have a food allergy. So the purpose of our study was to explore the impact of food allergies on the daily lives of young adults who recently transitioned to attending college away from home.
Okay, so I want to talk about our method a little bit. Basically, we wanted to do qualitative interviews using grounded theory. And I'm assuming that most of the people in the audience here are not going to, be sociologists by training. Essentially, these interviews are really open-ended. My goal is to, when I interview someone like this, is to try to get them to talk about their personal lives. So they're not guided with really specific questions. Inclusion criteria, I'll talk a little bit more about grounded theory, but not too much, hopefully. Inclusion criteria, just college students with food allergy, at least 18 years old, a prescribed SIE, and lived away from home. So we ideally didn't want people who were living with their parents still and going to the local university. For recruitment, we posted a flyer on a Facebook support group managed by FAIR, and we reposted monthly for a year. This is our flyer. So it says, we want to hear about your experience transitioning to living in a college environment. We gave a $25 gift card for people who participated. A little bit about grounded theory, just to give you a sense. Grounded theory was described in 1967 by Glaser and Strauss. Anselm Strauss is kind of the main thinker in terms of it. Glaser was more of a quant guy. But it has since branched into many different types. But it's really popular in the health sciences, in part because Strauss worked for a nursing department for a while. But there's two forms of it that we kind of pull from for the type that we do. And I bet most of you don't care about the details. So I'll leave it at that, and you can ask me questions later if you want. But one idea that's sort of phenomenological in a way is that the disruptions associated with their sort of newfound independence in college would accentuate participants' awareness of experiences that otherwise, in their familiarity, might be taken for granted and even unnoticed. So in other words, some of the things that we're interested in might happen to high school kids as well, and to their parents, but they might not even notice them. Whereas when you're in a new environment, all of a sudden these things become sort of obvious. The phenomenologists are big about talking about situations like that. Very different situations, but they have that in common. So again, the aim of our interviews was to build trust. I think of it like almost like you're trying to do an interview like Terry Gross on NPR would do an interview. You gain trust, you get people to open up about their lives, you get them to talk. So we had questions that we used for our IRB, but we really, ultimately the goal was to get people to talk. Once we did the interviews, we started transcribing immediately, de-identified the transcriptions, and then grounded theory has you sort of code the transcriptions several times. And really you start analyzing your data after you've done one interview, and you start analyzing those transcriptions. You go line by line on the transcriptions. You start writing memos about your ideas, and part of that is just really to obsess about the data for months and months and months as you're still collecting it. So when you do subsequent interviews, then you can change your questions, change the topics that you sort of push people to talk about based on the early findings, early ideas that you have. And then if you have an idea and you think, oh, this is a great idea, you do more interviews, it turns out to be a bad idea, you can change focus again. Or you develop it in a way that really you would never have thought that you would when you started the interviews. When we started these, we really knew nothing other than our personal experiences with food allergy. So we also conducted group coding sessions with our occupational therapy graduate students, which was kind of a fun way to dig into the data a little bit. The ultimate goal for grounded theorists tends to be to develop a mid-range theory, which really is a theory that should be abstracted from the population that you're focusing on, so that you're talking about other populations as well. So really, the idea is that the theory that we're trying to develop really should apply to people with invisible disabilities in general, and maybe even outside of that group as well. We completed 16 interviews, 30 to 90 minutes each, freshmen and sophomore students, primarily females, so 14 females, 2 males. all white, one graduate student. You'll hear the jargon theoretical saturation from time to time. I would say that that was achieved after about 14 interviews. In other words, we started developing our theory before that and felt like by the time we got to 14 interviews, we were not coming up with anything new about it. The early results were presented and discussed with 2 graduate cohorts after we were coming up with the theory, and including several students with food allergy. So that was almost a way of number checking, if you have heard that jargon. Several themes were identified during the process, and I'm going to read a bunch of quotes from the participants because I think that's the best way to present these ideas. And after these 3 themes, we're going to talk about a theory of disclosure fatigue. So the themes are hypervigilance, and this is just referring to the students themselves who really, our sample, they were really, really hypervigilant and knew the sort of rules around food quite well. In other words, and I actually think that this is a partial limitation of our study, our sample that we got was involved all students who knew what they were doing. That's not to say that they didn't engage in risky behavior. We'll get to that in a moment, but they knew what they were doing. It could be that because we sampled from a food allergy support group, we happened to sample from students who are the ones who are a little bit more paranoid than others are from the survey research that Alisha mentioned. We can talk about that in a bit later if you'd like. Misunderstood risk. So this is referring to other people. People, non-food allergy people, display grave misunderstandings of food allergy risk. And this is basically everyone, which is a big deal. And then stigma management is related to that, which is that because people don't understand what the risk is, they see these risk avoidance behaviors that the students that we talk to have. They see those as possibly being other things, like that of a picky eater. And a picky eater is a stigmatized thing. So if you're seen to be a picky eater, you don't want to be seen that way. You don't want people to think that you're being picky. What you're actually doing is trying to protect your own life. So the stigma management is one where students with food allergy inadvertently engage in stigmatized behaviors. And then that means that they have to account for those behaviors. They have to communicate details about food allergies to manage those stigmas. And that's a big deal for what we noticed that very early on and started focusing on that probably after the first 1 or 2 interviews. So let's start with hypervigilance and we'll go with some quotes. So again, our students, this doesn't mean that all college students with food allergy know how to protect themselves, but the ones we talked to, they knew how to protect themselves, but the college transition presents some challenges. It was a difficult adjustment, Jamie said, to experience the full weight of responsibility for her own safety. By the way, these quotes, they're not all quotes. Some of them I pulled from the paper and kept our words. So what you see out of the quotes is just from our paper that is under review right now. Having to deal with food allergy independently outside of my mom's sort of umbrella, because, up until age 18, mom is always there in case you don't just want to care about checking ingredients or something like that. What's key here is that she knows that her mom is checking ingredients. It's just that when she goes to college, now her mom's not there to do it for her. So now she's the one. And you would think this would be fine, but it turns out there's so many things in the college environment where you have to be watching out for yourself. And it's very different than in high school when you get into a routine where all your friends know everything about your food allergies because you've had the same friends for who knows how many years. So it is a very different environment than high school. As Mariah said, I wasn't just dealing with the typical transition to college, such as moving away from home, starting a new school, meeting new people, but I was also trying to eat, which most people don't think about because they just go out to eat and don't really think about it. But for me, every meal is a big ordeal. And we'll see that this is true, especially at the dining hall, which was never a stress-free environment, as I think it is for a lot of other students. As Sarah said, it takes me so long to get in and out because I have to stop and ask, what's in this? Look at the labels, question the staff. I've actually missed several meetings because I'm having to wait until I have to get food. we had two students, I don't have quotes from them, two students who actually developed a really positive relationship with the dining hall manager. And they would just text this person their requests for each meal, and then they would get it. But for all the other ones, they would show up and they'd have to look at what was available. They'd have to then wonder whether there was, even when they had a relationship with them, they still couldn't trust it. Couldn't trust that they were going to get what they needed and what was safe as well, or what they wanted nutritionally and what they needed for safety as well. Some of the dining halls had allergy-free stations. They were free of the top 9. And one even had a sign with instructions to use a clean plate and utensils, but people don't do that, said Matthew. So you still may end up getting something that you can't have. So even when it was allegedly safe for them and following all the rules, they were still worried about it. They were still paranoid about it just because other students weren't following the rules. One participant who ordered her own dinner from the dining hall still felt paranoid when she ate. Oftentimes I would have to stop mid-meal and calm myself down and tell myself the food is fine. Students regularly talk to their instructors at the beginning of the semester to communicate. As Skylar said, I've learned I really need to advocate for myself, because if I don't, nobody will. From the moment I sign up for a professor's class, I send them an email that is short and brief, but I say I'm going to be at the desk closest to the door and I have a severe food allergy. I've had 2 professors who just said, sorry, it's allowed, it's in the syllabus, and we're not going to change it. If you don't want to come to class, don't come to class. One of the reasons I point these things out is that there's a lot of work to communicate to people about their food allergies. And it's way more work than what they're used to doing in high school, partly because oftentimes their mothers were there to handle it, some of it for them. And the other part is that I think that the college environment does add some additional challenges. Outside of class, they also had trouble. Regarding college parties, Jamie put it this way: I don't see a reason to go, especially when there's so many people in a room and you can't tell them all that you're allergic. Like, you can't make sure that everyone knows equally. I think that's kind of the thing that would panic me the most about that kind of situation, is that the number of people and the heightened risk because of that number of people. Even outside of the college environment, vacations, road trips, weddings were another source of stress, said Patricia, because they involved significant prepping to ensure that safe food was available for the duration. Sometimes without access to a refrigerator or grocery stores with trusted brands. Hospitals, one participant said, could not even provide safe food options. That's a little bit depressing. Misunderstood risk. So this is where it gets really interesting to me. So people often conflate food allergy with food insensitivity. Do I mean sensitivity there? Ordinary pickiness, or even a mode of deceit. Referring to childhood parties, Emerson said people would notice her eating something different than everyone else, and they would say things like, why can't you have that donut? I bet you can have that donut and you're just lying. Gina recounted an experience with her sorority friends. They invited her to get to ice cream. And I said, I can't really do that because I have a peanut allergy. And I would come along with you. And one girl was just like, ugh, why are you being so difficult? And they gave me so much crap about it and were like egging me on to eat the ice cream. Referring to restaurants, Matthew said, people will say they're allergic to things because they don't like them. Or a lot of restaurants will not take it serious because a lot of people will say they're gluten-free. And it's not because of celiac. It's because they decide, or their doctor decides, no gluten would be better for them. But one of my friends has serious celiac and even a trace will send her off. So part of the issue is that now special diets have become sort of a thing where people have all sorts of special requests for restaurants. So now if you have food allergy and it's actually life-threatening, you're almost competing against all these other different types of special food requests. And I think that for a restaurant, it's probably annoying that people have special food requests. But if everyone was just with a life-threatening request, I think it would be taken very seriously. So that's where the stigma comes in. There were several reports of wait staff responding with disbelief or even hostility when food allergies came up, sometimes including passive aggressiveness, eye rolling, displaying an attitude, and even yelling, or worse, blatantly ignoring the allergy. The result, respondents oriented to persistently burdensome communicative and emotion work associated with talking about food allergy. So on one hand, it comes up all the time. On the other, it's really annoying to have to talk about it. So stigma management. Students with food allergy are concerned with standing out to people around them, including even their friends and family. So one participant, while discussing the difficulties associated with finding safe food while traveling, pointed out how uncomfortable it was when she would stress out because her friends would then display stress as well. I'm like, don't worry, and it's nice because they're trying to accommodate me, but then all this attention is on me and I don't want that. Another said, you're at someone's house and it's kind of awkward when they're in the kitchen and you ask to read the label and they have to like fish it out of the garbage. Once you get to know them, it's all right, but there's always that sense of guilt that you're making them go out of their way. If anything, I'd just rather not eat anything and make people go out of their way. One participant even suggested the social stress of being noticed was more severe than the stress associated with the physical risk of allergen exposure. Even transporting food somewhere, he said, created stress from sticking out among the crowd of people who aren't bringing their own food. So bringing your own food to the dining hall makes you stand out and potentially people comment on it. Why did you bring your own food? Then all of a sudden you're talking about your food allergies. Sarah talked about eating with her friends at Chipotle and then needing to talk to the cashier and wait at the side. You can't do it without standing out to the people you're with. Some participants reported taking additional physical risks to counterbalance the social stigmas. As Sam said, I would just grab stuff from the cafeteria and go and not ask what was in it. And I had 3 major reactions because I would just eat stuff, which was scary. But I just didn't care because I didn't want to be a burden to my friends. Students with food allergy learn to avoid circumstances where they would potentially receive unwanted attention. I don't want to be that one person at the wedding that has a special dish because I'm allergic to nuts, said Julie, hoping like others to avoid the seemingly inevitable conversations associated with standing out. So dating is like, when do you bring it up and how are they going to react, said Patricia. It's always a weird topic because like the first date is usually going out for coffee or going out to eat. And how can I sneakily suggest a place to go because I know I can eat things there? Or then even when you're ordering and I was asking all these questions and asking for all these substitutions. So then your first conversation is just all about allergies. So on a theory of disclosure fatigue, I think of this as sort of a 3-step process. The risk avoidance behaviors required of individuals with food allergies are responsive to a condition that's otherwise imperceptible. So it's an invisible disability. There's no reason that people need to know about it, especially strangers do not need to know about it. But the risk avoidance behaviors are noticed. So upon witnessing the hypervigilance of the individual with FA, a common reaction is to comment about the associated behaviors or otherwise discernibly react to them in both negatively and positively perceived ways. So even the ones who are friends, who are allies, who point it out, it's still they don't want to talk about it all the time. The individuals with FA then often feel compelled to account for their behaviors by providing further details of their condition or clarifying the risk equation. Number 3, upon experiencing these events unrelentingly, the individual with FA eventually concedes to facing 2 daily problems. 1 is avoiding allergens, the physical part of it, and 2 is avoiding talking about them. Disclosure fatigue occurs when individuals with FA tire of being compelled to talk about their condition and eventually find ways to avoid situations in which they may have to disclose their invisible disability. One avoidance strategy is to simply engage in more risky food behaviors by ignoring the rules they've learned to follow since childhood. So I'll be brief with the implications so we can hear from Megan. Risky behaviors may be avoidable and with appropriate planning and education. One thing I will say is that what we list as the first line of defense, if you look at a lot of the pediatric literature, we actually submitted to a nursing journal. So even looking at pediatric nursing literature on food allergy, it's all about the physical risks. It's about training schools to be able to use the SIE. It's making sure that people know how to do it. It's making sure that students know how to avoid the allergens. It's all the physical stuff. There's very little focus on the social stuff because in our sample, the students knew the physical stuff. It's the social stuff that got in the way. So the second line defense is where we really think there's a need for improvement. And that's considering why individuals choose to ignore best practices. It's not because they don't know better, I think. I think it's, at least some of them, it's because there's good reason to avoid having to talk about it all the time. And given how stressful college is for everyone and how big that transition is for everyone, even if they have no invisible disability that is an issue on a daily basis, this is a really, really vulnerable time for students. So some kind of considerations for college planning, and then we'll ask Megan some questions. One is to develop a working relationship with accommodative services. And that means that it's not just a one-time thing. It means that you need to actually know the person and be able to email and maybe even text the person, depending on how available they are. Number two is communicating with dining services to ensure that safe food options are consistently available. Although I think a lot of people do that already, and then they run into problems because people are, they can't trust their peers to not screw up the way that it's set up with an allergy-free station or something like that. And then to deal with that, they would have to talk to someone about their disability to find a solution. So again, it creates more disclosure events. Number three, develop a backup plan for when food is unavailable. This is something the parents can help with their high school students. Number four, discussing the reality of disclosure fatigue and the ways in which it can lead to risky behavior. So really talk about this thing we call disclosure fatigue and know that that's going to come up. Prepare students for this fact that when they get to college, they're going to get tired of talking about it and they're going to have to talk about it all the time. So come up with a plan for how, at least know that that's going to happen and think about how you can deal with it. And number five is preparing for the inevitable moments when the social risk equation overwhelms the physical one. In other words, be ready for when you're willing to eat that food because you don't want to be noticed.
Okay, Megan, so I'm going to ask you some questions and you can share your expertise from your accessibility background. So what are some of the accommodations you've seen for food allergies?
So some of the accommodations I'm seeing are access to housing with a private kitchen or a shared kitchen and a roommate agreement as to what pots and pans and utensils can be used. Also modification to the meal plan. So if a student's required to have a certain meal plan, making a modification. Or on my campus, we have one all-you-can-eat style dining hall with other eateries around campus. Students can request a meal transfer, we call it, so that they can eat at one of the other eateries without spending extra money on top of their meal plan. We have a few that often offer gluten-free bread and other options where the dining hall is all you can eat, and there's always that chance of cross-contamination. I had a student at a different institution I was working at who was very allergic to corn. So we made her floor popcorn free. The students were very gracious about it. We found out in a chemistry lab she was in, they were going to do an experiment with cornstarch. So we switched it to rice, something with rice. I am not a chemist, I'm not sure. And also the janitorial staff switched their cleaning products that were corn-based to other alternate cleaning products, which was great. Something I didn't even think of. Other accommodations, having all the food labeled and the ingredients labeled, which I think should be standard practice, but sometimes isn't. So making sure that's readily available to students, and things such as a syllabus statement that allows food in the classroom that can be easily modified to accommodate a student that has a life-threatening allergy.
So what advice would you give to students with food allergies who would like to receive accommodations?
So my advice is to talk to your disability services folks before you even apply to the college. When you're going to open houses and looking at what's available to you, find them, meet them. Sometimes a school might not be a good fit just based on what they are capable of handling. So make that relationship early. Just build that good rapport. So a really good proactive accommodations person will go above and beyond to make sure the student is comfortable and avoid that disclosure fatigue, because they can do that footwork for them. have the students be involved in the interactive process. It is disclosing again, but hopefully if you do it just the once, you can hit a lot of other folks on campus that need to know without having to have the student reiterate it over and over and over again.
How can accommodations mitigate disclosure fatigue in university students with food allergies?
So like I said, if you have an accommodation plan, then that eliminates having to talk to each and every instructor and your coach and the library staff and everybody on campus about your food allergy. Students will have to advocate for themselves with those people, but if you're relieving that burden from the student up right from the get-go, it's a little bit easier. I've had interactions with a coach recently in the past year who was consistently giving out snacks on the bus to games that contained peanuts, and the student had a life-threatening peanut allergy. And the mom actually called me and let me know that it happened twice. I wish the student had talked to me after the first time, but I had to, make sure to stick up for the student, say, you cannot do this. So hopefully the student didn't have to keep repeating herself to the coach over and over again.
So what is the balance between letting parents be involved versus encouraging the student to take the lead in their food allergy accommodations and really advocate for themselves?
This one's so tricky, and I don't think there's a perfect answer. Of course, we want students to be self-advocates. They are adults, they're young adults, but they're adults, and they're growing into their adult roles in life. It's the same things I see with students with learning disabilities and autism. We want them to advocate for themselves, but they're still so used to relying on their family and their parents for support. So I have a few students who I did not know had food allergies until their parents called me to let me know, like, hey, this is a problem. I currently only have a handful that have allergies, and a few are registered with me for other needs. And one or two are registered just for the food allergies, but oftentimes it's the parent that's calling and saying, hey, my kid needs this. And I said, it's lovely to hear from you. I need to talk to your child. So that's a hard transition to make. I like to think of it as a parent partnership. So sometimes the parents need to learn too about what is appropriate at the college level and what is not appropriate anymore. So they can't fight all of their battles for their child, but definitely having a partnership with the college staff, probably staff more than faculty, I'm not going to lie. And here at SUNY Canton, we're very hands-on and actively involved with a lot of the parents of our students. So finding that balance between partnership and what I like to call snowplow parents that tend to plow through all their students' problems for them. We want to avoid that. But just making sure the students know that they're not alone and they're not fighting this without their parents or their family behind them.
I just want to comment on that because I'm imagining if a student doesn't want to come to you, Megan, think of who else they don't want to tell about their allergies. Like SUNY and you especially, you're like the most easiest person to talk to. And so I wonder about these huge universities like Wisconsin, where I went to school. There must be hundreds or more students who never get in touch with accommodative services.
And even if I get documentation about a disability, whether it's food allergies or anything else, if the student doesn't want to come to me, I can't do anything with it. It just sits in my office forever. And I just wait. I reach out every semester. Usually I have a 3-strike rule. I reach out 3 times a semester. And if they don't want to register or disclose to me, then I can't force them to do it.
And then the result is that they have to tell even more people because they can't rely on accommodative services to do some of the work, some of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
This is our last question. What advice would you give to families and students when they come up against barriers? So kind of like that example of somebody having peanuts on the bus, or even, the dining hall might have started off being very accommodating, but maybe, some staff change and it's not so accommodating anymore. What advice would you tell them to how do they overcome these barriers?
So my first piece of advice is to document everything. Food allergies are a protected disability under the ADA. There have been settlements between universities regarding food allergies, and that's important to know. So if something is an accommodation that's not being met, document that. So back to the coach that was passing out peanut snacks, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to pass out peanut snacks. I called her. I have a pretty good rapport with almost everyone on my campus. So I called her and said, hey, so-and-so deathly allergic to peanuts. You're going to lose a star soccer player. So we had a good conversation about it. She said, I just forget. I just buy what's available. So after our phone conversation, I sent her an email. I said, to summarize what we talked about, filled it in the email, sent it to her, and also copied the athletics director. There's always a process if faculty or staff are not following the rules. If they're violating the ADA and they're not going to listen to me, they'll definitely listen to the provost or to human resources. So document everything. Don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. Make some noise. Nothing changes if you just sit passively and let it happen. So we get tough when we need to, but hopefully it is the accessibility office fighting those battles and not the students on the front line. They're stressed out enough. They need to know that they're being advocated for.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I guess now we're really open to audience questions.
Yeah, we got a few come through, all related to parent involvement in this process. So I will list them out and then we can, tackle them in whatever order you see fit. So one of our attendees said we must comply with FERPA, therefore we cannot share personal information of the student with the parent. What's the best way to talk with the parents to help assure them that we're helping their child without disclosing personal information? Because it can sometimes be awkward when parents are pressing for certain answers. For reference, I am a registered dietitian who works with food allergy students on a college campus.
Am I taking this one?
So we had a FERPA conversation the other day, so I think this is perfect for you.
Yeah, so with FERPA, if a parent calls me and wants to know things about the student, I don't even bother to look up if they have a FERPA waiver. I usually just let them tell me what's going on and say I can neither confirm nor deny. A lot of times it's parents giving me information versus me giving parents information. So I think when in doubt, ask the student to sign a FERPA release so it can be on record so parents can talk freely with staff and faculty on campus. If the student's not willing to do that, then I think that might be another challenge. I don't know. Do you guys have anything to add?
Well, from what you just said, parents can tell you all they want. That's not FERPA. So you can listen and then you can go to the student and you can tell that student that the parent talked to you and then let it be on the student.
Yes, I've had many parents call and say, don't tell my student I called. I'm like, I'm of course going to tell them you called.
Yeah.
They're 18.
Right. The other question was any suggestions on mitigating the snowplow parent and shifting their conversation to the student's responsibility in a tactful way. And I think that's one tactic, just letting them know that they're passing all this information onto the student. But do you have any other advice?
So my research has been mostly in autism right now, and it kind of fits. So the transition from high school to college is really abrupt and it's really different and really scary. So I think training students before they get to that part, start talking about self-advocacy skills starting in middle school or early high school, have them practice advocating for themselves with that safety net so that when they get to college, we didn't just throw them in the deep end holding a 10-pound brick. So avoiding some of that. I mean, parents don't want to see their children struggle, but sometimes it's okay to let them fight for it a little bit themselves before stepping in.
Let's move over to another topic and get back to disclosure fatigue, which you talked about in the beginning. David, do you think that some of this data can be extended beyond college campuses and into other hospitality spaces like restaurants or hotels, other food service locations?
Yeah, I think this describes this idea that you get tired of talking about your personal condition or your personal situation. It doesn't even have to be about an invisible disability. I think that can apply to so many different situations. I think that we captured a moment when a student is going to a new environment, a student who has unique food needs, and they're going to a new environment that's new friendships, so all new relationships. We captured a moment when it's really noticeable, but I think it's everywhere. I think, and you could design qualitative studies to look for how people get tired of talking about themselves when it's compelled because something they're doing gets noticed. So just imagine anyone who can sort of pass for not having any special needs or not having any until they don't. And then all of a sudden it's against their will, they have to talk about themselves. You know, we don't want to talk about ourselves with strangers or even with our friends in ways that we don't have control over. So I think it's everywhere.
Do you think that in any of your interviews, or now that you guys have had discussions as you're writing your paper, have you found that there are any tools that have been helpful in disclosure fatigue or disclosure stigma? So as an example, you know, an icon on their student ID card, like an organ donor card, some sort of tool that may be helpful so they don't have to say it out loud every time, but it's like a discrete identifier.
I have to tell you a story here. I did research on autism in Costa Rica. And one thing I noticed, so I'll wrap this around. In Costa Rica, I would notice that these, if you had a young child who had public behaviors that were noticeable, so your child would throw fits at the supermarket or, you know, bang their head against the wall, doing things that would get noticed. People would come up to the parent and say things like, have you gone to the doctor? They wouldn't necessarily bring up autism. They would say things to the parents. I thought this is such a sort of Latino thing to do. And then I found this dissertation talking about New York City, and it described the same thing where kids with autism were out in public and parents would come up and they would say things. And I thought how terrible that must be to have strangers coming up, like, you know, your kid is throwing a fit. So there's this one parent who made a business card, who in the dissertation described it wasn't even my work. He would hand it out to parents because he got so tired of having to explain, I know my kid has autism and this is what he does and this is what autism is. So I don't know that that's a great solution. I never talked to that parent, but it's a problem when strangers feel compelled to come up and talk to you about something that you know full well. So I didn't completely answer your question. I don't have suggestions on how to deal with this. I think that's going to take a lot of thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be useful for students with food allergies to have, like I said, some sort of discrete identifier, just to kind of eliminate some of the disclosure fatigue and some of that stigma that you had mentioned before. All right, we're at 1:45, so I have one like kind of two-part question here. When you have a student who reaches out with a food allergy and you have started the process to meet their needs, but are unable to put them into effect until you get medical documentation, and I'm not sure if this is because it's the beginning of the school year or it's because a student is a junior. You mentioned, Megan, you mentioned reaching out when you're looking at prospective schools. So maybe they're not even a student yet, but let's say you have a student who reaches out and you're starting the process to meet their needs. You can't put it into effect until they're officially a student and you have medical documentation. How do you help them in the interim? So whether they're already on campus and you just don't have the full documentation, or they're a junior, they're a prospective student, and it's future state.
So best practices for accommodations, lack of documentation should never be a reason to not grant somebody accommodations. So if a student comes to me saying, hey, I have a life-threatening allergy, I can't get a doctor's note yet, I'm going to believe them. I'm not gonna say, well, it doesn't count till I see something from your doctor. So occasionally, if it's something really time consuming or will cost the institution a ton of money, I might call it a temporary accommodation until we get more paperwork, but lack of documentation shouldn't be a reason to not accommodate.
And you mentioned varying degrees of accommodation, right? You have student housing that has a full access to a full kitchen that requires moving someone into a brand new dorm, into a whole, like that's a I don't want to say bigger accommodation, but a more time intensive accommodation. Or you can have, special meals prepared for the student in the interim while you're kind of waiting to sort out some of the documentation and finalize all the details of their plan. So yeah, I definitely would grant accommodations to someone because food allergies can be life-threatening and you don't want to take that chance. So thank you guys. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you to our presenters and for everyone that joined this session. Please be sure to join us in 13 minutes for our next session, Food Allergy Solutions Beyond the Dining Hall.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.